What's up, everybody? Matt Gajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. And today we're talking Week 4 College Football DFS, the main slate on Saturday. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And Prize Picks has a phenomenal offer for you guys. But first, what is Prize Picks? Well, they're a platform with daily prop-based contests. No sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You make lineups of player props. You can do this across sports, college football mixed with NFL, MLB, whatever it is you like. You could also do all one sport. And you can make lineups with up to 5 players where you can win 10x your entry fee. Click the link in the video description below for a $100 first match deposit bonus. It is that easy. All right. College football week 4. A fun slate ahead of us. We're going to bring you behind the glass, show you our data usage tool that we have on Stokastic, and I'll explain the top a little bit to you. The matchup factors. This is pace, under plays per game, how many plays they're running in this short season we have so far. FBS on FBS opponent only. The pass rates of these teams. O-line just is the amount of sacks they're allowing per game. D-line, sacks generated. Vegas statistics. And then these are defensive pass statistics, So Maryland allowing 273.7 pass yards per game. That's 5.8 yards per attempt. And then rushing, they're allowing 118.3. That's 3.3 yards per attempt. The same for Michigan below it, 91.3 rush yards per game, and so forth. The slate is a little mixed up in terms of order on this, so just bear with me if I accidentally do a noon Eastern game among the later games. We'll get through every game, I promise. It just might be a little out of order. I didn't have time to clean this up this morning. But diving into this, we'll start with Maryland, Michigan. It's a 16.5-point spread, 64 total, which is solid overall, giving Michigan an awesome 40.25 team total. They haven't played anybody yet, so this is going to be a good test for them. Maryland has played a couple opponents. They faced SMU, which was a quality win. Taulia Tagovailoa averaging 298 pass yards per game. A little bit mobile, 54 rushing yards for him on the ground. He's just been an interesting evaluation to start the year. You look at what he's done on the field, I thought he would finish with more against SMU. Just 23 pass attempts, 214 yards. That was a projected shootout. This team has a competent run game this year, and when they're playing from ahead, it looks like they're a little more willing than last year to take their foot off the gas. Now, that's not going to be the case here, at least projected it's not. 16.5-point spread in favor of Michigan. That should keep Maryland pass heavy, up tempo like we've seen in the past. That should benefit not only Tagovailoa if you want to use him in GPPs at his price. I think he's a little expensive, but certainly live there. But Raheem Jarrett, Jayshon Jones, Dante Demas, all these guys should have targets. It has been a little more of a rotation, but we can have a little more confidence in these Maryland pass catchers than previous weeks. Jarrett and Demas went up to a 75% route share. In competitive games, that should be the case. Jones is their wide receiver 3. Will rotate a little more than the 2 aforementioned players. And then Dykes should be their tight end. He's the 3rd most targeted player on the team. More interested in run backs to Michigan than anything else. Looking at Michigan, they moved to J.J. McCarthy as their signal caller. He's still largely unproven. His stats are unbelievable, but they've come against teams like Hawaii, Colorado State, and he hasn't played full games, so you can't really look at his stats right now. I think the best thing I could say for him is he's really mobile, and he has the upside to be incredibly efficient. So if he ends up being that might be the most important thing we can say, and this could be his cheapest price all year. We just don't know. So use him in tournaments at your own discretion. In the receiving game, Donovan Edwards should be coming back from an injury. He's the number 2 back in this backfield with Blake Corum. They'll form like some form of 60-40 split or close to it. And they'll occasionally involve other guys. I think CJ Stokes is the favorite for those 3rd RB duties. They run a ton. They play fairly up-tempo. It's more balanced than anything else, but you're going to get a lot of rush attempts from this offense. Corum, solid play. Edwards, solid play. Nothing stands out too much at their prices. Corum's very expensive. In the receiving room, I am expecting Ronnie Bell and Cornelius Johnson to be the top 2 here. Ronnie Bell has been the most targeted, 24% target share, which is great to see coming off the season-ending injury last year. He is expensive, but again, we haven't seen this offense really function to full capacity because of their opponents yet. I will probably play a couple of these guys in GPPs. Cornelius Johnson's expensive too, just 9 targets, but we know the upside for him. Eric All is maybe interesting as a flyer at 4,800. He should be the full-time tight end. It's just this team will rotate a little bit at receiver and tight end, and they generally favor the run. So it's hard to predict overall what to do with this team, even though it's kind of like the Georgia thing last year where they had huge totals, but they split it so much it's really hard to project. Clemson, Wake Forest, a game that went way over the total last year. It's sitting at 56 here. If it plays to this 56 total, you're probably not going to see as much production as we did last year. Hartman went over 300 yards. It came mostly in garbage time, but 7-point spread in favor of Clemson. I think that's fair considering they're the healthiest they've been on the D-line all year, which is their biggest mismatch. DJ Uiagalelei has not passed for 300 yards since 2020 when he faced Notre Dame. He's essentially been a glorified game manager. The one positive we can say about him is his rushing upside has increased since he lost that weight this offseason. 117 yards on the ground has been good for Uiagalelei. Clemson plays fast. So does Wake Forest. So this is sneaky shootout potential. The over's taking money, but they still prefer to take the ball out of Uiagalelei's hands. That means Will Shipley is a decent play at 6,700. This team does use a timeshare with Phil Maffa and Kobe Pace, but when the going gets tough, we will see Clemson ride Shipley. He's easily their most efficient back, averaging 83 yards per game, 249 yards and just 32 attempts. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry, active in the pass game. He's a GPP option. At receiver, we haven't seen anything condensed yet just because of the games Clemson's played. Their toughest opponent was probably Georgia Tech, and they rolled him in the second half. But I think Bo Collins and Joseph Nada are your top two guys here. They're GPP options behind bad quarterback play. I'm somewhat interested in Brandon Spector. His route rates have been pretty good, but he's only seen 10 targets this year. I think I would prefer Spector over EJ Williams right now, but it's super close. Antonio Williams has also been a guy with 10 targets. We'll see if he continues to be a main part of this offense. I think any of the top 5 can be used in tournaments, but because of the uncertainty, I would leave them at that. Wake Forest, again, if you use the team total here, Hartman's not going to project for 300 yards, but if you think they go over this total, which they did last year, the game total that is, then Hartman might be a bet to eclipse 300 yards. He's been super efficient in his 2 games back, over 300 yards on average, somewhat mobile. He averages about 20 yards per game on the ground. And this guy also averaged over 300 yards per game last year passing. So the volume's there. It's just this is his toughest test that he'll probably face all season long. Again, based on the total in the game, he should not project for 300 yards, but he's always live to get there. The price is a bit expensive, but we know Hartman stacks are always going to be in play for tournaments. A.T. Perry, Donovan Green, top 2 receivers here. A.T. Perry has the edge in receiving yards and targets. Green, close second. I think they're both fair prices. Interestingly, they've kind of moved away from Taylor Moore and Keyshawn Williams, and Jamal Banks has had a really good role lately. He had 7 targets in their last game. That still trailed Williams by 1, and it was 1 ahead of Taylor Moore. And their targets went 8 Williams, 7 Banks, 6 Morin. They are going to continue to rotate, and that's going to include tight end Blake Whiteheart, who isn't on the field every single snap. But ultimately, I think darts of these 3 players make sense. With Banks being the cheapest, he'd be the preference to me. In the backfield here, it's going to be a timeshare between Justice Ellison and Christian Turner. Really tough matchup against Clemson's front 7. They're out of play for me. Central Michigan, Penn State, 63 total, 28-point spread. We already saw Central Michigan backdoor Oklahoma State. This team plays really fast, really pass heavy. Daniel Richardson probably not in play himself. He's averaging 296 yards per game, but this is the toughest defense he's faced thus far. Penn State, really good pass rush, elite secondary coverage. Richardson could backdoor his way to 300 yards, but he's not mobile. And this is probably the least likely chance of him doing that all season. So I would rather play others. But because of the pass-heavy nature and up-tempo offense, I think you can run players as run backs here. Carlos Carrier is probably going to come back to this game. I believe he had his wisdom teeth removed and didn't play in their last game. But interesting enough, I think you could still look to the pass catchers here. Top 3 are going to be Joel Wilson at tight end. He actually has 24 targets. He has a 19.5% target share, leading the team there. Jalen McGahee, 22 targets. He has 200 yards, leads the team in receiving. And then I think it's Carrier next. He had 9 targets in each of the first 2 games. Again, I'm expecting him to return tentatively. Just watch and make sure we get news on that pregame. The last situation is a little tougher to evaluate here. I think you're probably looking at some combination of Finn Hogan and Sam Hicks. Dallas Dixon, he's projected to be out for the rest of the year, which is a tough break for this offense. But again, I think they'll move the ball. In the backfield, Lou Nichols is a complete monster. I think you play Lou Nichols in tournaments if you'd like. We see game script affect him a little bit, just 15 carries in week 2, but he did have 26 in week 1 that came against Oklahoma State. So Lou Nichols, GPP option. We know the volume is there, which is solid in terms of upside. On Penn State, Sean Clifford is a tough player to evaluate. He's been somewhat limited in these games, 28-point spread again. That gives him a good team total, but they've been pretty quick to use players like Drew Allar in these big blowouts. And they've also really leaned on the run game when they've gotten into these situations where they're up by multiple scores, and 28 definitely fits this bill. Last time they did this against Ohio, their pass rate fell below 40%, which definitely doesn't help Clifford. So I think that combination makes him risky, but if you just look at his overall volume statistics and his efficiency, he's pretty good. I'm going to avoid. In the backfield, Singleton is certainly a beneficiary of this situation where, they go run heavier, and he's been incredibly efficient. The guy's averaging over 6 yards per attempt. Singleton is slowly working his way into a feature back role, so I think he's a solid player at his price. He projects extremely well as long as you give him similar work or a slight bump in work. And then in the receiving room, we have also Kevon Lee is questionable, so that would only narrow it further. Then in the receiving room, we have 3 legitimate options here. It's Parker Washington, it's Mitchell Tinsley, and then it's Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think between these guys, Mitchell Tinsley's still the number 1. The prices are now finally reflecting this. He has 21 targets. That's just ahead of Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith at 14 and 13, respectively. Again, in these game scripts where maybe they go a little run heavier, I'm probably not playing any of these guys. Last guy to mention, Brenton Strange, tight end. He's actually been really efficient. He leads the team in receiving yards. I thought there might be a timeshare with Theo coming back, but he's still nursing an injury. Brenton Strange has quietly been usable. Maybe you could get to him as a GPP option. Missouri-Auburn, 7-point spread in favor of Auburn, coming off that debilitating Penn State loss. Missouri still in rebuilding mode, kind of. They got crushed by Kansas State and then haven't played too many other competent schools. Brady Cook, solid dual threat ability here. 212 yards on the ground. That's awesome. 159 yards on the ground. He's averaging 212 through the air, nearly 213 on 29 attempts. Now, Missouri plays pretty fast, so there's going to be volume for Cook. He's live to eclipse like 200, 250 yards on a per game basis. And then what he gives you on the ground is a bonus. So I actually think Cook is viable here despite the 22 team total. He's just incredibly mobile. And you can stack him, I think, 2 ways. Dominic Lovett and Luther Burden, they have 25 and 21% target shares. Lovett's been way more efficient than Burden, but Burden also gets carries on the ground. He has at least 1 carry in every single game, 6 on the year. He scored on the ground. He would be the player I prefer, but Lovett has been solid as well. From there, Barrett Bannister had 8 targets in their last game. He's just more of your GPP option on a low team total situation. Running back is still a committee. Cody Schrader, Nathaniel Pete's the preferred pass catcher. They also involve a couple other guys like Elijah Young. It's probably just a stay away from me at running back. For Auburn at quarterback, TJ Finley's out. They have not really made a decision between Robbie Ashford and Zach Calzada. Calzada is at the Stone Min, but I think there's a chance Ashford plays the whole game. That's what I'm hoping for, at least. He would become useful in GPPs, in my opinion. Auburn is nearly implied for 30 points in terms of team total. They have a very mobile signal caller in Ashford. He's been competent as a passer, somewhat like serviceable, I'll say. Whatever he gives you there is really just a bonus. Ashford on the ground would be a player I'm interested in at 5K flat. He would be a pretty decent play if you gave him the whole game. Tank Bigsby just not getting enough work. Jarquez Hunter is involved. It's like a 60-40 split at this point. Bigsby way more involved. Positive game script would help him, but he's just a GPP play at this point. And then in the receiving game, Malcolm Johnson returned. He immediately played nearly full routes. It was him and Jarvarius Johnson. John Samuel Schenker would be the next guy I look at here. It's a rotation beyond that, but in terms of pricing, I think Johnson's fine. Jarvarius is fine as well. Schenker, he would be the cheapest I go. TCU taking on SMU. Really good total here, 70.5, 1.5 point spread in favor of the Horned Frogs. Coming off a bye, we get Dykes facing his old team, SMU. What better chance to prepare for them coming off a bye? It's your old team. No Chandler Morris. That means Max Duggan will be the quarterback here. He is Steady Eddie, a veteran in this team. Pretty good efficiency for him in his career, and he's also mobile. His stats are warped by the timeshare from week 1, so don't read too much into the 208 passing yards per game. That's going to increase. This offense also has been really vanilla through their first 2 games. That's opponent-based. If you look back at the old SMU offense that their coaching staff comes from, they were top 20 in seconds per play last year, so looks like bookmakers recognize that, made a sky-high total. I'm expecting the volume to drastically increase for TCU. It's going to be running back by committee. Kendry Miller, Amari DeMercado, and Amani Bailey functioning as the 3-back committee here. Kendry Miller has upside, but he's a bit expensive for a guy in a 3-way timeshare. At receiver, you basically have Quentin Johnston and Savion Williams as the top 2 guys. Neither has double-digit targets at this point. Nobody has 100 yards receiving, but again, we're expecting all this to positively regress. Johnston, he's expensive, but I think you can play him in tournaments. And then Savion's cheap enough where I'd get to him. He's coming off an injury. Not scared of that at this point. All reports have been positive. Quincy Brown's out. That might narrow the receiving room, giving you more Tay Barber, more Darius Davis. Tay Barber and Davis would be interesting GPP plays, but Savion is cheap enough where I definitely prefer him in a 1-for-1 situation. SMU, Tanner Mordecai, elite signal caller, good mobility, averaging over 300 yards per game. He's passing the ball a ton. SMU also up-tempo and pass-heavy, 334 yards through the air. It's his toughest matchup thus far, which must be said. This is a tougher defense than Maryland, and they have good corners, so that could limit Tanner Mordecai, but the offense is going to propel him to success more times than not. So I still think he's fair in terms of price-adjusted plays. Prefer Dugan in a vacuum, but still Mordecai is fine. Trey Siggers, coming off the injury, nearly a bell cow role, which took me by surprise. I thought this would be a timeshare, but Siggers, 19 carries coming out of the gate, coming off the injury, 2 targets. It's 21 touches for him. He's still viable here at 5,900. In the receiving room, Rashee Rice has one of the most ridiculous roles in football right now. 19 targets in their most recent game against Maryland, averaging 163 yards. The guy is averaging 15 targets per game. If you're paying up for a receiver, it's Rashee Rice. I don't care that TCU has good corners. This kind of volume is ridiculous. Behind him, we did see the return of Jake Bailey, played good amount of routes, 5 targets for him. He would be the pivot I look to at 6,200. But you could also look to Austin Upshaw, in my opinion. It's a spot where they've rotated receivers a bit. This is largely due to injury, but I do think there are some potential leverage spots off Rashee Rice. Again, I think Jake Bailey is one of them. And then just peeking at the routes last week, Austin Upshaw, 79% of routes. Calvante Dixon was at 20%. So yes, Dixon was more targeted than Upshaw, but solid leverage opportunity there. I'll take the 3,500 guy in some spots. Duke, Kansas. Yes, game day should be here. 7.5 point spread in favor of Kansas, 65.5 total. Another awesome game. Both these teams are pretty slow. So this is a bet on pure efficiency if you're looking at the total. Riley Leonard for Duke has been solid, and he has a 29 team total against a defense which has given up a lot of points, especially through the air. He's averaging 241 passing yards per game, nearly 50 yards in the ground per game, not taking any sacks. Riley Leonard is quietly a good play here. The only real issue is Duke's level of competition is not on the level of Kansas. So maybe you think that they struggle against their first tougher test. If you're stacking him, Jalen Calhoun projects really well. He has a 26.5% target share, averaging just 66 yards per game. That'll get better in more competitive spots. Jordan Moore looks like the wide receiver too. I think that's fine. And then it's a split between Samir Higgins, some of these Eli Pancol for wide receiver 3. You can't really play Jordan Moore because of his position designation, but you can certainly play Jalen Calhoun. At running back, Jalen Coleman splitting time with Jordan Waters, even Jaquez Moore is involved. So Duke is tough to navigate. If you're playing Leonard, I think you're either playing him naked or you're using Calhoun. But I think this is a team you can still get pieces of here and there. Kansas, Jalen Daniels has really taken a step forward, and we've highlighted his rushing ability. I also want to highlight it's coming on designed attempts. He has 25 designed carries. He has 30 carries overall. He's never been sacked, so that means in these 30 carries he has just 5 scrambles and 25 designed rush attempts. That's incredible volume for a signal caller. Props to the Kansas offense. Now, as a passer, He's averaging about 190 yards per game, just 23.3 attempts. That's going to be elevated in more competitive games, but you can be happy with Daniels knowing it's a run-heavy team, but he's very involved in the run game. It gives him a solid floor and ceiling. His price is fine if you want to target him. The backfield is basically, well, it's kind of a three-way committee with Daniels involved, but among just the running backs, Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw are the only two receiving carries. They've funneled out Kai Thomas and Sevion Morrison. They both had just 3 combined carries in their last game. Between these guys, I'm probably playing Highshaw because of price. They've both been efficient. Highshaw has more targets. He's just cheaper between the two. Neal is going to present opportunity cost at 7.2K. The receivers haven't really been too involved. Arnold leads the team with 15 targets. Luke Grimm is right behind him at 13. Only Arnold and Quentin Skinner have over 100 yards receiving. These guys are dart throws as attachments to Daniels, but they should probably be unowned. I think Grimm is still my favorite play at his price, but Skinner's involved. Arnold is a bit expensive, but you could also play him. Minnesota taking on Michigan State. We've got Minnesota as a slight favorite here, 2.5 points. 51 total is not great, but Tanner Morgan reunited with his old OC, Kirk Shiraka. We saw Michigan State, largely through injury, just get absolutely decimated by Washington. Don't really see any reason that would change. Again, their players aren't coming back. So Tanner Morgan now reunited with his old OC. That was his most efficient season in college, and Tanner Morgan's quietly been really efficient this year. The problem for him is volume. The team is a 29% pass rate, but they've played nobody. They've been in extreme positive game script. In more competitive games, they will, out of necessity, have to pass more. I don't think Tanner Morgan is live for DFS, but on sites like Prize Picks and stuff where you can find his prop in the 180s, he's interesting there. And more than anything else, I think he's efficient enough and he'll have enough volume in games like this to prop up pass catchers. Now, Chris Ottman-Bell is out. Luckily, we have a pretty clear picture of what their receiving core is going to look like. They basically have 4 guys on the field the whole time between their 3 starting receivers and tight end. It's Brevin Spann-Ford. He leads this group with 127 yards, 10 targets. Dylan Wright, he has 8 targets, just 58 yards. Michael Brown-Stevens, 8 targets, 107 yards. And then they returned Daniel Jackson from injury last week. Only 2 targets, but he was the player that stepped up when we had injuries last year. I would expect him to play a full role without Ottman-Bell in the picture. They're all really cheap. I prefer Brevin Spann-Ford because of route participation, target rate, and efficiency, but you can also play Wright, Brown-Stevens, and Daniel Jackson, in my opinion. In the run game, Mohamed Ibrahim, crazy workload. He's averaging 155 yards per game. Michigan State is better on defense. They still have questions, but Ibrahim should not have this level of efficiency. Volume works for him more than anything else, but Trey Potts is also there. It's like a 70-30 split. It's just their run rate is so high that they both average crazy attempts per game. It's 23 opportunities per game for Ibrahim. That's targets plus carries, 14 for Potts. They're both just a tad expensive for this game script and this game environment, but you can play really both of them with a preference to Ibrahim. Michigan State, Peyton Thorne, not the most efficient season to start, but he's gotten there largely through garbage time, averaging 256 yards per game, just 34 cumulative rushing yards. With Thorne, tough matchup, low total. I think there's better options for the price, but what would really make him live, in my opinion, is the return of Jayden Reed. Now, Jayden Reed did not travel with the team last week. He's their number 1 receiver. He's their most explosive playmaker. I want to know if Reed plays, if I'm going to play any Thorne. I think together contrarian stacks might be live, but it's still a really bad game environment. Reed's got a good price. Behind them, Keon Coleman's the wide receiver 2 now. He's the wide receiver 1 when Reed is out of the picture, averaging nearly 80 yards per game, 7.9 targets. He's a solid play, rock solid. Trey Mosley's the wide receiver 2 when we don't have Reed. He should be the 3 when everyone's healthy. 11 targets for him, averaging 47 yards. And then just for reference, when Reed is out of the picture, they did rotate receivers a little bit. It's Monterey Foster and Jeremy Bernard, their 4-star freshman that handled most of the routes. They should be rotational players otherwise. Tight end is a rotation for this team. And then in the backfield, it is about a 70-30, 60-40 split between Jalen Berger and Jarek Broussard, neither of whom are catching passes. Berger did have 4 targets in their last game. That should be said. But generally, what we saw last year from Walker has been the case to start this year. They're not throwing to running backs a ton. But if I were playing one, it would be Berger. He's a middling price-adjusted play. Florida taking on Tennessee. Tennessee's been brutal through the air. It's a 10.5-point spread in favor of the Vols, 61.5 total. So Tennessee's certainly a team we want to look at. But Florida, Anthony Richardson, can we finally get him right? I'm not sure. There are reports out there that he's banged up, and that's why he hasn't been rushing. And that's a huge concern for Richardson. In the last 2 weeks, he has 6 combined design rush attempts. He had 9 in week 1. He still hasn't reached even that 9 mark in the last 2 games. That's a huge problem. If he's not running, he's not playable. Period. As a passer, he averages 140 yards per game on 25 attempts. He just is not a good passer. And now he's arguably facing the best defense of the year. You can make the argument Utah is better. Doesn't matter. All this means is that Tennessee is pretty good on D. It's not going to be a cakewalk for Richardson. I'm not playing him. At receiver, his lack of passing has seeped into the receiving core. They're also not playing Ricky Pearsall all the routes. He is leading their team in yards per game at 40. He had the foot injury in the preseason, and it makes me question, is Pearsall fully healthy right now? Otherwise, there's no excuse for him playing limited routes, and that is a question on their coaching staff at that point. But there's at least that excuse that you can make that Pearsall's not fully healthy, and that's why he's not playing full amount of snaps. They're playing Xavier Henderson and Justin Shorter on full routes and snaps. Doesn't make sense. It's not helping Richardson. He just doesn't have the bodies to throw to either. Running back's a 3-way committee. You're not playing the running backs. Tennessee, we have Hendon Hooker. He's been awesome to start the year, averaging 281 yards in just 28 attempts. That efficiency he's averaged through his career has not gone away. He's still decent rusher, 63 yards per game. That's about 21 on the ground per game. He was up around 50 last year, so that should positively regress in more competitive games, which we have here. So Hooker, 8,100. He's still an elite play. They're a little banged up. Jabari Smalls got hurt last week, only 2 carries. That let Jalen Wright just run away with 23. But overall, Jabari Small is healthy now. Allegedly, he practiced this week. This should be close to a 50-50 committee when everybody's there. But I think Jalen Wright might have played well enough to at least get the edge in the committee, like a 60-40 split. He's also cheaper. I'm going to take some shots on him as a 10.5-point favorite with Tennessee, who just runs at the speed of light, and they're run heavy. In the receiving room, Cedric Tillman's questionable, dealing with an injury. When he plays, the upside's undeniable. He averaged almost 100 yards per game last year. He's at 82 this year, 9.3 targets. He's the alpha of the team. Hope he plays, not just for him, but for Hooker's efficiency. If he doesn't, Jalen Hyatt, he's over 2 yards per route run. He has actually more yards than Tillman on the year. He's been incredibly efficient. And honestly, I don't think the offense takes a huge step back with Hyatt operating as the 1. That should put Brew McCoy in the 2. He has not been efficient, but part of the reason is he's playing with Tillman and Hyatt. Like, you're just going to pass the ball to your studs. Brew McCoy is a quality wide receiver 3, and I think he can step up. And then behind these guys, like, you have guys that have played real legitimate games. Jimmy Holiday is suspended for the first half of the game, but even without him, Gramel Keaton's a former starter on this team. Now, he's not electric by any means, but he started games. It's not like we're moving to a freshman without playing experience. Gramel Keaton's played significant snaps for this team. I think they're going to be fine regardless of Tillman. Obviously, his status would be a boost. For DFS, Hyatt's a good play. Brew McCoy would become a good play, and Keaton would become a GPP dart. Texas, taking on Texas Tech. Man, what a fun game this is. 60 total, 6.5-point spread. Both teams pretty fast. Texas Tech running the Zach Kittley air raid offense. Quinn Ewers is practicing. He may legitimately play in this game. Really small sample, but incredibly efficient. Wouldn't be worried about the negative rushing yards. He was labeled a dual threat by most recruiting services. I think Ewers, if he plays, would be a good GPP option. Card, honestly, is serviceable himself. He runs a little more than Ewers. Not quite as efficient through the air. But just know that both of these guys have skewed statistics based on the timeshare they had to play through the Alabama game. Neither of them have played full games this year outside of Ewers and Texas in the first and the last game. But Texas Tech's a decent defense. Luckily, they run so many plays that they boost the play volume of their opponents. The best play here is still Bijan. Incredible efficiency for him. He's averaging over 100 yards per game. After their Cupcake Week 1 game, he's been over 20 touches in back-to-back contests. He's a guy that should continue ascending. Great pass catcher as well. He has 10 targets on the year. Over 100 receiving yards. Good job, Bijan. Roshan will be a situational change of pace. In the receiving room, we have clarity among the top 3. Xavier Worthy is going to be the 1, 27% target share. Worthy's playable. Jordan Whittington, he's their full-time slot. He's averaging around 50 yards per game. He has a 21% target share. And then Jatavian Sanders, their tight end. He has a 16.5% target share, but he's 3,500, so he's the cheap attachment I would look to for Texas. Texas Tech. No Tyler Show, but Donovan Smith is still there. He is playing serviceable. The efficiency is not great. He's around 7 yards per attempt, 262 yards per game. That's largely coming through the overall volume, 37 attempts per game. But he has a 7-5 touchdown to interception ratio. Interestingly, he only has 4 turnover-worthy plays per PFF. So, yes, his receivers or whomever else is responsible for at least one of those interceptions. We need to cut Smith a little bit more credit. His playmakers around him need to be better. The backfield is a pure timeshare. I can't imagine targeting that. Smith is also involved in the ground to a degree. So at 7K, I think Smith is playable in tournaments. You're just a little worried about the potential leash right now. He might get benched if there's more interceptions, even though they're not all his fault. At receiver, Jaron Bradley should be the one. The routes have been bouncing all over the place for this team. They haven't been consistent. 1 week, it's Miles Price that leads them. The next, it's Jaron Bradley. Then it's Nehemiah Martinez. They're basically all dart throws. If I'm choosing between them, I'm choosing Bradley. He leads the team in targets. He also leads the team in receiving yards, and he's 4K. He's cheaper than both Fungi and Price. And then Nehemiah Martinez is the stone man. He's the third most leading receiver on the team. Third leading receiver, I guess I should say. 165 yards. That's behind Miles Price at 167 and Bradley at 172. He's got pretty good route rates. I'll take a stab on him in some lineups at the stone mint. Indiana, Cincinnati. This game has a 16.5 point spread, 57 total. The best thing we can say about Indiana is they just throw the ball incessantly. Up-tempo, heavy pass rate. Basilic is your definition of a pocket statue that can backdoor his way to 300 yards through raw volume. He's averaging 297 per game here. Rather than target Basilic, who's a middling value play based on his lack of rushing upside, I think you could just target his receivers. Cam Camper is averaging 14.3 targets per game and 97 yards through the air. He's 5,600. He's one of the best values in the slate. Cam Camper is still playable at this price. DJ Matthews, a great pivot at 57. He's slowly emerging after coming off the season-ending ACL. Right behind Camper, 24 targets. It's just 18% target share, whereas Camper's at 33, but 201 yards. He's been more efficient than Camper. I think he's a good pivot. And then Barner, if you're looking for a really cheap option, averaging 5.3 targets per game. He's their tight end. They rotate wide receiver 3. And much to everybody's surprise, I guess I should say, Sean Shivers, 16 carries to Josh Henderson's 10. It is more of a timeshare than we thought. That probably renders them both unplayable for now. Shivers getting a slight edge still. He still had 6 targets. So Shivers, I think, is a decent price-adjusted play, but the Indiana backfield is a lot less enticing than we thought last week. Cincinnati, Ben Bryant, not mobile whatsoever, but he's similar to Basilic, where the offense passes enough to get him close to 300 yards. He's averaging 292. This team will still take their foot off the gas when they're playing from ahead and ride the run. We saw Charles McClellan with 17 carries last week. Corey Kiner with 7. They're still going to use a committee at running back, and Ryan Montgomery projects to come back this week. So I don't know what the committee looks like. If you're taking a shot on someone, it's probably McClellan, but I'm a little weary with the potential for 3 guys to be involved, 4 at worst. Wide receiver is a little bit more condensed than normal. Will Paulding is out, and that means Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker have played pretty consistent route rates. They also saw 8 and 9 targets. These guys, I think, are actually playable for the first time since we had Alec Pierce. I'm actually interested in a Cincinnati receiver. Now they're expensive. I would rather get up and play a couple other guys like Rashee Rice, but they're not out of the question here. They rotate tight ends, Josh Wiley, Leonard Taylor, not too interested. And wide receiver 3 is a combination of Jaden Thompson and Nick Mardner. So I'm probably just focusing on Tucker and Scott, but actually a little more interested than typical. Oregon, Washington State. This game is a 6.5 point total in favor of Oregon. This team's been moving the ball. The total is 57. It's pretty good here. They moved the ball against Georgia. 2 picks in Georgia territory really hurt Bo Nix's stat line. He could have looked much better. He's been awesome in the other 2 games he's played, and beating up on BYU was key. He's also really mobile. So 5,900 Bo Nix is still too cheap. They also have condensed their receiving core a little bit, at least in terms of routes. Troy Franklin's the one at 5,200. He's firmly stackable, 15 targets in their last 2 games. The only guy over 100 yards receiving, and he's at 202, so he's solid. Chase Cota, he's their number 2 in terms of routes, and he's well ahead of the other guys. He's well ahead of Thornton, Hudson, and Seven McGee, who are all rotating. He's a stone min, or excuse me, he's just above the stone min at 3,500. You can play him in stacks for sure. Ferguson, he's among a tight end rotation. I'm probably not getting there. I'd rather just play Coda, I think, but maybe a GPP option. The backfield's going to be 5 guys. Byron Cardwell projects to return to this game. That means should lower the ceiling for Marquise Irving and Noah Whittington. They'll also play a little Jordan James, Sean Dollars, plus Bo Nix had 7 design rush attempts. A complete mess on the ground. Washington State, Cameron Ward, not quite benefiting from the volume yet, but he's averaging 35 attempts per game. 242 yards. Better days should be ahead. Part of that came against the brutal Wisconsin defense. So in better matchups, Cam Ward should be playable. He's not the most mobile guy, negative 12 yards. I think he's a little more mobile than that, but he's cheap enough here to maybe throw some darts in tournaments. We'll see about the status of like Ashford. If Ashford gets the full game, I would prefer him over Ward, but otherwise Ward might be a really, really cheap dart. The backfield has trended towards the committee. Nakia Watson started as the bell cow, but it has since involved Jalen Jenkins. If you want to take a shot on a 4,600 Nakia, it's possible, but not the best. There's another guy I'd rather play. At receiver, Donovan Ollie looks like he's now the one. 27 targets to Dezon Stribling's 17. 190 yards to Dezon Stribling's 136. Ollie is cheaper, and he's 3,500. I think we're getting the number 1 receiver at 3.5K. He's going to automatically project really well. They're rotating receivers a little bit outside of that. You'll see Lincoln Victor, Renard Bell. These guys play a good amount. And then we saw Robert Farrell play a decent amount, Orion Peters. These guys mix in occasionally. I'm going to focus on Ollie. Stribling would be a good GPP play, and then Victor and Bell would be your just tournament darts. Baylor taking on Iowa State. In this game, we have a really low total at 45. It's the lowest on the board, which is automatically concerning. Blake Shapen has not been the answer at quarterback. I don't think you can play him at this price in such a bad game environment. At running back, Tay McWilliams is hurt. Thought Craig Williams would be the guy. He was in week 2, 17 carries. But Richard Reese played really well in their last game. He's easily been the most efficient, and he had 19 carries. He's a freshman. He's the stone min. I don't know if he handles this kind of workload. It was a blowout, but I do think he is involved now. So at worst, I think you're looking at a 50-50 committee, and maybe you actually see Reese work ahead of Craig Williams. This remains to be seen, but he's certainly earned more time on the field. Receiver is a complete disaster. We're still without Monterey Baldwin. Ben Sims is a concussion. We kind of just need to see if these guys return to action, but even if they do, I'm not sure you're playing a Baylor pass catcher. Their leading receiver is 93 yards. You're probably just avoiding, to be honest. For Iowa State, Hunter Deckers has played reasonably well. He's averaging 248 pass yards per game, and he played Iowa already, so that's a credit to him. He has not shown the same mobility as last year, the mobility he showed situationally, so I don't know if this is just a blip or if he's just not quite as mobile as we thought, but he needs a little more volume. Fortunately, Iowa State is still passing about 50% of the time. That has not changed for them. It's going to be a decent volume offense, and Hunter Deckers being still relatively unknown. You could throw a dart in tournaments, even though the total is really low, and you're probably, I don't know, probably not looking at a huge ceiling. Deckers, the unknown factor, at least makes him playable. If you're stacking him, it's with Xavier Hutcherson or Jalen Noel, the top 2 receivers on the team. They've rotated Sean Shaw, Stanley, and the other guys. I would just stick with Hutchinson. He has a 36% target share. Noel's the 2, but he's the seldom targeted 2. In the backfield, Jarrell Brock. Against Iowa, he had 27 carries. That's unbelievable. I think Jarrell Brock is the bell cow back for this team. Last week wasn't as competitive, so we saw multiple guys involved. I'm projecting a little closer to 20 than I am like the 7 we saw in their most recent game. I think Brock could be a potential value at 4,900. He's at least playable at this price. Getting to our last game, it's Notre Dame UNC. I know we're out of order in terms of time starts, but this is just the way it was in my unorganized spreadsheet for the moment until I fix it. North Carolina, 1.5 point spread, 55 total. Decent game for North Carolina. I think you can play guys on that side. Drew Pine had 150 passing yards last week. 146 of them came after the catch. He had a 2.6 average depth of target. He's just not playable. He's also not mobile. Logan Diggs projects to come back from injury, renders this a 3-way backfield, and they're projected to be underdogs, so you won't see this elevated carry share for Estime or Tyree. Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Styles are the only guys I'm interested in from a receiving perspective. Mayer at 59, still too expensive. Styles actually has more receiving yards than him, despite seeing 9 fewer targets. It's a disaster. North Carolina, Drake May's been solid. He's averaging about 50 yards per game on the ground. Really good passing so far, 308 yards through the air. Their defense is so bad that they're just creating shootouts. Now, is Notre Dame good enough on offense to exploit that? I don't think so, but potentially. App State scored 1,000,000 points against this team. But either way, Drake May's been really efficient. And he might get back his top 2 receivers in Antoine Green and Josh Downs here. Downs would be an incredible value at his price. Green's the clear number 2 here. And I don't know who they use as the 3. Based on the efficiency, I'm leaning Kobe Pacer's way, but like Gavin Blackwell's played a lot. JJ Jones has played a lot. There's a risk that this is a timeshare if we get both Antoine Green and Josh Downs back. Tight end is also a rotation. Kamari Morales would be the guy I look at, but not too interested there. The backfield looks like Caleb Hood's going to come back, so we probably have a timeshare there as well. Omarion Hampton, their freshman 4-star, is the guy I want. He's the most efficient. He has 228 yards. The next closest is Drake May. No other running back has over 100, but again, you're still likely looking at a committee. But that is every game. 13 up, 13 down. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Matt Gajeski. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think of these games, who your favorite plays are. I'll make sure to get back to you. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm on Twitter at Matt_Gajeski. Thank you to Prize Picks. And until next time, we will see you then.